Welcome to a special live edition of Spilling the Tea on GovCon. I'm Teresa Moon, Vice President of Communications and Marketing for Parabolis. We are the preeminent partnership for government contractors, providing holistic support that includes a line of credit to fund your growth. The purpose of this podcast is to assist small businesses with success in the federal marketplace by introducing them to industry experts and resources that they may not otherwise know about. Today, we welcome back longtime friends and recurring guests of the show, Ton Wilson, CEO of Entellect LLC, and Jeff Shapiro, partner at CohnReznick. Both have contributed multiple times and are backed by popular demand to cover some pertinent issues facing small to mid-sized federal contractors. Welcome to the show, Ton and Jeff.
Thanks for having us.
Thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. Great. So today we're talking all things related to pricing, compliance, proposals, and of course, funding execution, and what we call the domino effect. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I wanted to encourage everyone to stay tuned till the end, where we're going to open the floor to you for a live question and answer session. So don't miss that. You got to stay tuned. But I want to set the stage a little bit and talk about the interconnected nature of GovCon. So to start us off, I'd like if each of you could briefly share a bit about your role and how your work intersects with the government contracting ecosystem. Ton, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Well, great. Thanks for having me. And for those who don't know me, Ton Wilson, President of Entellect. I'm the founder and CEO of the organization. I would say that in this discussion, I live on the front end of the life cycle with the BD, capture, and growth strategy for government contracting firms. But here at Entellect, we support the entire life cycle. But I find that if you start work early on in the RFP process, the shaping of the opportunities, the building the relationship, helping customers decide which pursuits are actually worth chasing, which is where we come in with our customers, that will consistently be more successful than coming in at the very last minute. So that means that I'm constantly pulling in my pricing people, my compliance, my contracts, and financing to have conversations earlier. I'm one of those people who would rather have pricing discussions earlier rather than later. And I think it's really important, and we've talked about this before, Jeff, is that, leadership really needs to understand what to expect, because there are some deals that are winnable but could be dead on arrival if you don't get alignment in that. So I kind of see myself as this translator where I can kind of translate what does this mean technically speaking from a compliance and a pricing perspective, and from a business perspective too. Should we chase this? Do we really want this work? And if we do, how do we really kind of shape it to be successful?
Awesome. Jeff?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for having me on. I'm Jeff Shapiro. I'm a partner at CohnReznick, as Teresa mentioned. I work in our government contracting specialty practice. I lead our contract audit team. So on that side of the business, we are actually government contractors. My largest client being the Department of Energy. We're doing audits from all cycles of the procurement process, from pre-award to post-award. So, particularly relevant for today's discussion, we'll be talking about, what the auditors and what the cost or price analysts are going to be looking at on the pre-award side. So I have supported a number of source selections, done, sole source audits, business system audits, you name it, I've done it. Been doing this for well over 20 years now. And, doing the post-award side, looking at incurred costs and closeouts. I also, because as if I don't have enough to do, I do a number of advisory engagements and help clients out on the pricing side and giving them advice on best practices related to putting together those cost volumes, which surprisingly can get you in a lot of trouble on the selection side. I speak from a lot of experience today. I've worked in the government for 8.5 years in the Intel community, and during that time, I led a number of the cost evaluation teams. So we'll definitely give some of that perspective as well today. So looking forward to today's discussion, Teresa.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about, in the GovCon world in general, decisions around pricing, compliance, capture strategy, they're deeply connected. So from your perspectives, where do you most often see that contractors underestimate those connections? Jeff, I'll go ahead and let you start that.
Yeah, I think, Ton, you sort of referenced it right there in your intro, but not carefully reading RFPs. A lot of folks get very caught up in, it's a statement of work. We could totally do this work. This is great. Let's go and pursue. And folks will not look at the small print, I'll call it. those pesky H clauses or the reference clauses later in the contract. You got to do those too, whether you like it or not. So one of the hottest topics of the day, CMMC, is now that these requirements are going to be input into DOW solicitations, other agencies are referencing, are you CMMC compliant? And GSA is in process of doing its own version of it. If you're not complying with that or about to be compliant with it, that is a no-go, no matter where you're at. And the fact that you didn't plan for that you're here today reading the RFP and see a system requirement like that, and you're like, oh no, what do we do now? Yeah, that's bad planning. So understanding those kinds of compliance issues, whether it's an acceptable accounting system, EVMS, estimating systems, there's so many things to go down the line that if you don't have that, you're not capable of doing it, or security clearance, that's another one. Like, don't spend the time answering to that RFP. Todd, I would love to hear your perspective.
Jeff, I can't believe you went there with the
Can
clauses.
I take your answer?
God, no, you didn't. But that's not the fun sections to read. And so I can always predict on any given opportunity who's going to go where to read what first. And then the follow-on questions, I can almost predict what the follow-on questions are because the technical goes straight to C, the contracts go straight to like H and K, sometimes F and G. Don't forget, like those other sections. Your proposal people go straight to like L and M. And so I kind of feel like, an opportunity gets released and they all go to their separate corners. And then they kind of come back and ask all these stupid questions that they should have read to begin with. And so I get where you're going with this, Jeff, is that, from my perspective, is that a lot of times people do fall in love with their technical solution. They fall in love with what they're capable of doing, but then they don't, and you can't fault the, like the technical functional people from, for doing this, but that's their wheelhouse, right? That's their silo they operate in. And so I think it's really important for those in financing, pricing, and contracts to kind of speak up, but they can't speak up if they don't have a seat at the table. And so I think that's really kind of where the disconnect kind of starts to happen, is that the company doesn't have this cultural awareness or maturity to understand you want to bring your pricing in early. Yes, sometimes are they the Debbie Downers of the, of the discussion? Absolutely. It's too expensive. We can't afford this, like we don't have the right people or whatever. But wouldn't you rather have your own internal people flush out all of these, like red flags than to submit and go tens of thousands of dollars in debt bidding on something just to realize the customer is going to tell you the same thing, right? You don't have the right systems. You didn't price it properly. You have no awareness of what it is that it takes, that it requires to kind of execute this contract. And so, not understanding how your indirect works, not understanding how some of these certifications, are kind of like a deal breaker. It is really kind of one of those things where you don't want to get caught off guard. So let's just have an adult conversation about it at the beginning.
I couldn't agree with both of you more on all of the above. And I think from our perspective in our industry as well, that so often when we're talking to people about the funding of the execution, it's always after the fact. And while things can happen relatively quickly in certain circumstances, wouldn't it have been better if BD was going to the parties that matter and saying, this is what we're bringing to the table. So how much do we have in the bank, or let alone how much are we going to need to bring into the mix as far as capital in order to execute at the highest level? So pricing is a part of that, right? And I think all too often there's not the communication internally about what's it going to cost for us to actually execute at the highest level, and where are we going to get the money that we don't have now in order to do so without having to run around with your head on fire, because that's the worst position you want to be in. You always want to talk to your lender. So I want to direct this question at Jeff. From the compliance and audit side, where do companies most commonly introduce risk without realizing it?
Yeah, I got two areas that I think of when you ask me that. First one is subcontracting. I think the technical folks are going to instantly think about the performance side, but from a proposal side and from a performance on the back office side, subcontracts provide a lot of risk to you if you're proposing as a prime, or maybe it's a further down tiered subcontractor. If you read most RFPs, competitive RFPs within Section L talks about if insufficient support is received to any of the factors within this Section L, your proposal can be thrown out because it makes it look like you don't understand the requirements. And that doesn't just apply to you as the prime submitting, but it applies to the subs that are sending in their sealed packages to the government. So those sealed packages come in and have a very high level overview of how they came up with their rates and all that. That's going to cause some consternation. I can't tell you how many times on the cost evaluation team we took the packages in. Sometimes we got a nice thick one from vendors, and other ones you had like one page, which should be a 10-page at least, describing basis of estimates, all kind of good stuff. And we had to have a long powwow with the acquisition officer saying, what do we do now? I know you don't really want to throw these folks out, but if we have to, we can. So don't make the government have those kinds of difficult conversations, because you have to remember at the end of the day that people are still making these decisions. And so if you give them any reason to have those kind of conversations, they're going to remember that. So not only from the pre-award side, but subcontracts then on the post-award side, if your subs claim unallowable costs under your contract, guess who's liable for those unallowable costs? You as the prime. So what are you doing to monitor your subs to make sure they have the good internal controls in place? Are you asking if they have an acceptable accounting system? Have they been audited by DCA or a third-party CPA firm? Show me a copy of your CMMC compliance audit. Get, trust but verify. It's great to get those certifications within the contract that you may have with them, but get the proof, maintain it. You brought them in. What did you do to ensure that price that they're charging you is reasonable? Document it. Second area I'll talk about is for T&M contracts, whether it's a Part 15 contracts by negotiation or Part 12 contracts done in commercial. You need documentation related to the labor categories. How did you choose that certain labor category and charge at that rate? I can't tell you how many contractors have gotten a lot of trouble when they started going through the audits. Someone blew the whistle and said, hey, my company has been charging a SME for someone who's been here for like all of 2 or 3 years. I just don't feel that's right. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of liability that you're putting on yourself if you don't document and don't carefully make sure that your LCATs are being hit properly. And again, not only at the prime level, but at the sub level. So making sure that you have good controls over that and doing the right thing, you'll stay out of trouble. This isn't hard, but I can't tell you how many companies do a terrible job of maintaining resumes and job descriptions and other details that helps justify the rates that they charge on T&M contracts.
Mm-hmm. So, Ton, from the capture and growth strategy side, what are some of the most common strategic mistakes that undermine a company's ability to win?
Well, gosh, I don't think we have enough time to really kind of talk about all the big mistakes. But, I talk a lot about strategy and why that's so important. And I think the biggest mistake is probably when people treat business development as an activity and not as strategy, where they have lots of meetings, they go to conferences, they do happy hours, they do all the girl and grins. That's the fun stuff. Like, I get it. BD people love that shit. But, but they do it with like no clear idea of who do we serve? How do we win? What do we say? And so they almost kind of need this, these talking points on what's really important. And it goes back to a lot of times that companies don't have a really clear defined mission and vision. And we're not talking hokey mission statements, right? About how you want to do good for the earth and, like all this other stuff. It's literally your mission. What is it that you do, as an organization? That's first and foremost. And I think that kind of permeates throughout the entire organization. But I think the second thing, and there's a lot of conversation in industry right now about this, is chasing contracts instead of customers. And so I'm not I'm not the smart person who came out and was, brought this to light or is talking about it. I think it's just something that I think it's important that everyone's talking about right now, is that there was a time period for those of you who are old, like the rest of us, and have seen this life cycle kind of, ebb and flow, is that there were times where you were chasing contracts, like literal contracts. And now we're faced with more solutions based, customer focused type of, business development strategy approach where, yes, you need to understand the contract details. What is it? What's the core set of services? What's the mission of it? But do you really, at the end of the day, understand why the customer is doing this? And there are so many times when someone says, we're going to chase after this contract. And I was like, okay, you can't even spell the customer's name. And what exactly is it that why are you doing this? And I'm not saying why to be flippant or to be, combative. I'm just trying to pressure test, the reasoning for this. Like, do you understand the premise behind this program, what the customer's mission is, what their pain points are? And I know we talk about pain points a lot, but it's not like a trite conversation that is just one of those things that you need to kind of check off. You really need to kind of know that. And I would say, like, the last thing would be not planning early enough. And that requires a delicate balance because I know that there are some customers who are like all in. The minute there's a draft, because Shipley says so, we got to go through all of these gate reviews and stuff like that. And I'm not hating on Shipley. And I know there's some of us out there who call for the killing of certain color reviews. But that's on you, industry, for not right sizing and scaling the Shipley approach because it was not meant to be done from soup to nuts. You're supposed to bring in someone who's qualified. And if you don't have one, oh, by the way, you can bring in Entellect to help you kind of do that. But you need to know what elements of Shipley to kind of introduce when. But the key thing is to understand, why do we do that? And so the Shipley approach and the entire planning of like the pre-RFP and the capture is not meant to be robotic. It's not meant to be full of checklists or PowerPoints or briefings. It's really meant to be pressure testing and really kind of, flushing out your vulnerabilities. And so, I would say don't underestimate like how much time that takes, because it takes time and you're going to have, times where you've got great success and then you're like backstepping. So what's that saying? Like one step forward, two steps back. And so that's okay. And then I think we don't allow or tell our BD capture people that's okay if you come and bring me something that I'm not going to want to hear or something that's, like not a positive thing. But at the end of the day, you've got to kind of, experience that and flush that out before it kind of comes out. So wouldn't you rather know now rather than later?
Yeah, you sit on it too long, it becomes a bigger problem, right? And that's just what
And then more
we think would
expensive.
be
And then
common sense.
Jeff's upset because, like I just ran up, your overhead and your rep rate. So
That's right.
Right. I mean, where are you both seeing some of these common misconceptions turning into challenges, turning into, missteps? And not just the life cycle of the company, obviously earlier in that life cycle has the biggest case for it, considering the fact that there's a big education gap usually in jumping into federal contracting, regardless of if they worked for another company that did it. The breakdown usually is because the owner of the company is a functional operator as opposed to a business leader, so they try to do too much on their own. So it's kind of twofold on this. I'd like you guys to explore a little bit in terms of where in the life cycle do you see some of this? Ton, you've said it in the past in your Bless Your Heart LinkedIn blogs about, it's people and process, and one can't be more important than the other, but the process is really what gets you to the other side in terms of being able to scale and make it. And you've talked pretty much a little bit about that already, but where in the stage of the business development cycle are you two most seeing companies run into the trouble? And why does that specific stage that you're highlighting tend to be so challenging? And
I'm going to let Jeff take this one first because I think Jeff, I think you see it at a different place than where I see it. And it could
probably.
be because I'm a betting woman, so I'm Asian. We'll bet on anything. But I bet that your stage is different than mine. And I'll
I don't
answer
know.
second and not try to be contrary.
I had a bad feeling I'm gonna have the same answer as you. When someone asks me this question, I always say, especially now more than ever, that the problem is when you see an RFP for the first time and see a requirement first time, that's going to be probably too late for you to have a chance of winning it. Is that going to be yours, huh? You got to have the relationships. You were just talking about it. And that's why I thought you were going to go there with this. If you don't have those agency relationships, you don't have those prime contractor relationships who understands that customer so that you can customize your approach to what that customer actually needs. It's one thing that's what's written on the paper on that RFP, but understanding the culture behind it and the challenges and that they've been through 4 different systems to try to figure out how to get to this problem that, now this is the 5th time they're trying this. Like, if you don't have that background, that's likely not on the page when you're writing to the RFP. If you don't have that background and you don't write to those challenges and why this one is different from those 4 other times, you have no chance of winning.
Come on, Jeff. I was hoping you would argue with me on this one here.
Bring something on. Let's do it.
Yeah, no. So totally agree with you on that. And I think I think where companies get into the biggest trouble is in the qualify stage, right? Like it gets a little muddy between identification, qualify, and capture. And I think companies muddy the whole qualifications and capture. They think that that's a singular activity, but it's not. You could work on qualifying an opportunity and never go to capture. You could go kill it. You could qualify an opportunity and go straight to proposal because of the time frame. But what I'm seeing more of is that they fast track all of that front stuff and they somehow convince themselves that, yes, this is winnable. We can do that. And then it falls to part and goes to shit in a handbasket when we go to price it, because then all of a sudden they're like, I can't hit my price to win. I don't know what my price to win is. That price to win is that anomalous line. It's almost kind of like saying, hey, what's the cut line for the Army MAPS score, right? Like I wish we had Brian Friel on this because I was like, Brian, what's the cut line? But it's kind of like that, like that unknown moving cut line. For bids, it's that unknown, what's that price to win? What's that threshold? Can that customer really, tolerate this pricing? And so like, if you can't hit the pricing and you're bidding a super expensive solution, or you are bidding super senior people, or it's because, it requires senior people, then I don't know what you can do at that point, especially if the government's, independent, like estimate is what it is. How are you going to convince them that it should be something different if you didn't work on it or, start to kind of strategize and pressure test that new pricing with them before the RFP got released? So again, it's that proverbial, like hamster wheel type of issue.
But hold on, let's go a little bit deeper down with IDIQs because you've mentioned MAPS. How many people are trying to get in on all these IDIQs and not realizing the cost of being on these IDIQs? If you don't have a real strategy to actually win any of those task orders, you're going to be so in the hole proposing on how many task orders that you have a P-win of like 20% or less.
I know, but to be fair, there's a lot of FOMO out there, and I think people are trying to hedge their bets, right? Like I can't fault a customer for saying, I need to be on MAPS. I got to be on Oasis Plus. I got to have one of the Oprah Shield contracts, right? Like if you're going to get shut out for 10, 20 plus years, then it's almost kind of one of those, the cost of doing business type of thing, where it's kind of like ISO, right? Do people really want to go through and get the ISOs, or do half the companies actually operate under the requirements of ISO? Probably not, but they have it because it's a give me score on these scorecard bids. And so these vehicles, which is the reason why a lot of these IDIQs, GWACs, and BICs are the bane of my existence, is that the only people making money on this are people like myself, because you need me to help you get onto them. But at the end of the day, it's really kind of sad because they have no strategy for winning. They don't understand the customer. And so some executive told them, you got to get on it just because I need that vehicle. I need one more
Had procurement
logo
of
to
2026. Yeah.
Right, right. It's like the collection of, certifications at the end of your name, but you never
Mhm.
use any of them, right?
I mean, that's the hardship and the heartbreak of it as well, is that there are so many of them and there's such a lack of understanding about what happens once you get it, because you're not going to get a phone call that says, here's your task order. It has to be worked after the fact too. And having to work it costs you money as well, because you're paying someone to do that for you, or you're taking your time away from, working on your business and by working in your business. And so it's costing you money somewhere. And I think a lot of things that I'm hearing now that we're kind of piecing together is that companies need to be thinking about aligning their funding method, their financial support, the compliance portion of it, and the business development and capture teams, so that they're not operating in silos. And, where in the developmental phase does that typically happen for a company that tends to make it over the 5-year mark, right? And I think we're looking at it just broad scale. Those businesses that actually make it and then are able to scale to get to that next stage of growth, what do they need to be thinking about when they're hearing all of these things from us today? They're talking about the things that they're missing. They're talking about the things that they're not doing correctly because they might not have the background to be able to do it and aren't resourcing out to companies like yours that can do those things for them. So, how does someone sit down if you were the owner of the contractor and you're listening to this today? What do they need to be doing to make sure that everything's not acting independently and there is some kind, I mean, obviously to me, it would be like, everyone needs to sit down in the room before the opportunity's gone after and say, this is what we've got before us. This is the mission of the agency or the vehicle that we're going after. These are the task orders that are appropriate for us. This is the way we can produce, something that's going to capture their eye within this. And then this is what we're going to need in terms of funding outside of what we already got in the bank today. I mean, that sounds just too easy. But in my world, it just isn't being done often enough. It's not that it's hard, right?
No, I think, Tom, you talked about it before too, about, including everyone earlier in the capture process, having pricing and
Mhm.
compliance in the same room. Because often what will happen is, historically, tech teams come up with these great innovation solutions or approaches to the problems. But the challenge is it's such an unusual approach that in order to price it, given that company's indirect rate structure, they need to create something new. And heaven forbid you're cast covered, which is going to become less and less frequent, which, for someone like me, it's a mixed blessing, but for someone who wants to get more participation within the industrial base, it's a good thing. It really is. Anyhow, you need to understand that if they're not working together, you're going to have a flawed pricing volume that is only going to introduce more questions on the source selection side, saying, wow, are these folks really not talking to each other? We said that so many times. And again, human influence. And again, if the customer doesn't have confidence that your price is realistic and reasonable, you're not going to go anywhere, especially in a competitive source selection where best value is what's going to be judged. You're going to subject yourself to pricing adjustments because you involved pricing so late, or pricing wasn't involved from the start, and understanding how to help you build out those bases of estimates and help you get to a strategic price that where you can play with your rates, but you got to do it much earlier in the process so you have a chance to do something different. Whether it's a management challenge on an indirect rate, whether it's something you want to do with fee that's unique, whatever it may be, in order to get to that price to win, your pricers, the cost accountant side, the controller, all got to be involved in all this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So to be fair, though, and I'm going to pick on the numbers people for a little bit because that's what I do, is that I had a strategic pricer who was like, listen, I deal in numbers. I don't do words. Okay. And I was like, oh my God, like the entire RFP is like laced in words. So, and I'm joking a little bit here about that. But in all seriousness, it is an actual concern, is that I think pricing, compliance, sometimes operations, they don't understand the BD speak. And so I think there's a whole shifting of perspectives that they probably need to better understand. And I'm not saying that BD is not, you know, culpable for some of this misinterpretation in the entire process, because they are, right? Like they're speaking two very different love languages. And so, BD is pie in the sky. Capture is like, prove it to me. If it's not on paper, if it's not part of a data point, then it doesn't exist in my world. Proposals are like, I'm totally constrained by what this says. I don't care if you're smarter than the customer, but this is what the customer wants and this is what we're going to do. And then pricing is out here is like, yeah, no, I can't do this. This is my, I got to be totally inflexible. And so you do need to have someone who is, like I said before, we're interpreters. We kind of help, translate what the other person is saying, because I think a lot of times there's a misunderstanding, like we're saying the same thing and we're almost on the same page, but we're speaking two different languages to get to the same point. But leadership really needs to kind of come in and kind of set that tone and that expectation of what is acceptable. What will we do? What, you need to color within, these boundaries here. Otherwise, people are going to start pulling out Sharpies and markers and crayons, and it's like a hot mess at the end of the day. And so, I think it's the language thing too, but I think also pricing and where it comes from and wrap rates and things like that tend to be held kind of close to certain people. And in some organizations, this, Jeff, some organizations are like, I am not sharing that with my PMs, and I get it. Loose lips, sink ships, people leave, whatever, and you don't want that out there. But you do have to trust your people who are in certain decision-making positions with that information. I've worked with organizations where the directors had no eyes in on salaries. And I was like, I'm sorry, like, how do you price? How do you, do any of this when you're like, oh, I'm going to put Joe on here. I'm going to put Mary on here. Next thing you know, it's like, you blew up your entire, BOE. So I think there's enough blame to kind of share across the circle here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do though? You got certain professionals who work on commission, right? The BD people is like, I don't care if this thing makes money. I just want to win.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I do face that a lot. And I do tell my BD people, hey, listen, if you do work on commission, you want to win, then you need to be part of the solution, right? You can't just throw shit over the fence and say, hey, happy day, I'm just going to start collecting. You got to put your pound of flesh into all of that. And if we can't get the pricing and we can't get the solution all on the same page, then you're going to see nothing at the end of the day. So that's on you. I don't buy that. So that's a cop out.
Yeah, you can't disconnect yourself from it to push it over the goal line, because it's going to take everyone's effort.
And then blame everybody else, because who's getting blamed, right? Proposals is getting blamed.
Always proposals.
Right.
Always proposals.
So I think we've hashed out a few red flags, but, there's a lot of people that tend to see some quick success and then a fall off, and then maybe one-hit wonders every now and again after that. And so what are some of the early warning signs that a contractor's growth strategy might not be sustainable? If they're doing something now and it's not working and they're not recognizing it, what do you see when you're stepping in to situations and helping and you're looking at the past? What are things that you can say right off the bat? Well, these are the things that you were doing that were early warning signs that this was coming, that this wasn't sustainable. Jeff, what do you see on the accounting, pricing, compliance side?
All right, I got to take the CFO approach and say losing money, right? So you got to track to your budgets. You got to understand if you are buying into certain projects, that is a strategy. But man, you better turn around quickly, or else your banker is going to be really pissed and be like, "You're out of your line because you purposely bid this at a negative 5% profit." Like, you said that 6 months after this, with this past performance, you're going to get this next project at 15% profit, and so on and so forth. And so, Teresa, you're welcome. Yeah. So, like, if you don't follow up that buy-in strategy with an immediate, like, big top and bottom line win, you're going to sink so fast. Like, if
Mhm.
you start going down the LPTA path and thinking that's your long-term future, and you're thinking that you're going to buy in all these investments and buy this factory to help expand production. LPTA is not going to get you there. So you
No.
got to understand the numbers. Sorry, CPA
Yeah.
point of view, I have to say it.
It's very true. Ton, I can't imagine that you disagree with him, though.
Freaking numbers, man. They
No,
haunt
I
my
want his BD
existence.
side though. I want to hear when's that
Yeah,
not working.
I the whole buying in on a contract, that just and I've heard that a lot lately is, "Oh, we're gonna really discount this rate. We're gonna get a foot in." And I'm just like, "Okay, been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Let me know how that works out for you." And then you have the audacity to tell me that I'm expensive. And I it's like, you
Yep.
just executed the most expensive bid strategy in the history of GovCon. I think where it's not sustainable, and I really do feel badly for companies that see this like success and then it just plateaus or it dips and they become this GovCon one hit wonder. And the one hit wonder tends to be, they got the contract because that's the contract they were on when they were on the, contract. And they thought, wouldn't it be great if I started my own business and took the contract from my employer or from the prime and then do it myself? Well, that's great and all, but then you got to show up to like do other things, right? Like you can't just continue to kind of do that. And I think this kind of goes back to, simplistically speaking, leadership not setting the tone and a clear mission and vision for, what you're going to be when you grow up. What do you like?
Yeah.
How are you going to survive beyond this one contract? And I've seen companies that are very large that, die because they lost that one contract. They didn't
Mhm.
work on how do you sell and repeat these services in an adjacent organization. I think the word for the year, and I've removed it from my vernacular, is pivot. I used it a lot in 25. I've actually banned it from conversations. And it's not like pivot
That should be your
is,
next T-shirt. Don't say pivot.
don't say pivot. Yeah. Right. Because like pivoting means different things to everybody. And
Yeah.
I think that in this administration and this time frame right now, it's really difficult to know how and where to pivot. So I think the operative word we need to go back to is diversify. You need to really diversify. It was never like a bad word. I don't think it's a word that I think should have ever been removed from anybody's discussion. And I know, Teresa, you're probably going to agree with me on this too, is that you need to diversify on many different fronts.
Mm.
And so that, I think, is the reason why some companies don't sustain their growth. I think the other thing too is they will tend to grow too fast, too quickly. And so I do have, people who are like, oh, if I only had more people, if only I had, this. And in some instances, that is correct, right? Like you don't want your proposal team working nights, weekends, and can't take vacations, right?
Right.
But that is endemic of a poor bid qualification and a bid no bid process. And so you can right size that fairly quickly without, increasing or blowing up your proposal team. And so, margins matter, your budgets matter. And I can tell you, I'm going to call out industry on this, is I bet you a lot that most people out there don't know what their BMP budgets are. They don't stick to it and they don't have one at the opportunity level. They might have one at the big, big department level. And then they burn through all of it. I've been told many times, Ton, we can't bring you on because I burnt through all of this. And I'm like, you should have paced yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's like GovCon is a freaking marathon. It is not a
Mhm.
sprint. And so many companies just sprint from one sprint to the next, and then they wonder why they're out of money and they don't have a high P win and a high, win rate. It's
Mhm.
because you're chasing everything in a skirt that walks by. So
Yeah. I mean, the diversification portion of it is key, especially on our side of things too, because how do you keep feeding the beast when something else falls off? I mean, you don't have to be in GovCon for very long to see the relationship you have at agency A is always looking just like people in industry. They're always looking for either another government job or moving out of government because they don't trust it anymore in terms of the ability to stay long term. And so they're looking outside into industry. When that relationship's gone, what are you doing if that's where you've had all your eggs in that one basket? And it applies across the board with their proficiencies too. It doesn't mean spray and pray into things that are just a little bit relevant to what you do, but looking into initiatives and something that's going to enlighten the way that you're doing it in terms of doing it better and doing it in a way that's mission ready for another agency that needs you for a particular other project. And so we tell them, especially from a funding perspective, if you're not diversifying on both sides of the plate, both in government and commercial, what are you going to do when you have a 45 days shutdown and you have to go through, 4 or 5 payroll cycles without having any money coming in? So I think diversification as the word is, pretty spot on there, Ton. You say a lot of things that I agree with, but that one I really agree with. So that one's good. I think a
Come
lot of
on,
what
I
we
want
talked
someone
about,
to fight me here. Fight me, seriously.
I probably will. And then when I see you in person, I'll fight you for real.
Okay.
That's a good thing being almost a head taller than you.
Seriously.
All good though. So I think a lot of what we've talked about is being disciplined in the execution. And so in your respective, proficiencies and bringing that expertise to bear here, what does disciplined execution and accounting and compliance and BD proposal capture really look like in practice for businesses listening closely right now?
Well, I think we talk a lot about discipline and focus and having really kind of clearly defined targets. You can't be everything to everyone. And I think everyone is starting to kind of realize that now. We have some customers who come to us and I've got an identity crisis. And when we start mapping their capabilities and looking at their past performances, I'll randomly ask you, what was this contract all about? What? Oh, well, we had a friend of a friend whose wife was whatever. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's
Yeah.
how that came about. And so there's a lot of disconnect between having very defined targets where you are focused on things. And staying focused is really hard in this FOMO age of instant gratification. And so that's why sometimes I don't even look at my LinkedIn because everyone's there are some of my colleagues, I'm not going to name names, who like to announce this contract is out and this is out and let us help you with that. And if you notice, I don't do that. And so I will talk about specific opportunities, but I'm not going to advertise more distractions to industry because there are plenty of other people who are out there to do that. We are focused on let's get back to your core mission of what it is that you do. You may think that you're similar to another organization, but you can't be them, right?
Yeah.
So it's like keeping up with the Joneses in GovCon perspective will not end well. And it's going to come around to bite you in the ass at the end of the day. So
I love it. Yeah. My application of this as a Stephen Coveyism, begin with the end in mind, meaning
yes.
you know what you're good at. Keep that focus and show that you deliver. Be able to articulate your ROI, be able to say, I implemented this system at this agency that enabled them to free up these resources to go work on this thing. You got to be able to talk the talk that will actually translate to that evaluator, be able to say, yep, that's a huge strength. And they want to keep buying you because you're so good at it. Yes, there's going to be a point where, you can only deliver your service to so many people and you are going to have to further diversify. And does that mean commercial? Does that mean state or local? There's so many different ways to go with it. And then you can figure out whether or not you want to go to different verticals, and that's fine. But understand, focus on what you're good at. Don't all of a sudden say you're good at IT and then all of a sudden start saying, oh yeah, I can also do construction. Probably. And on a similar note, and Tanya, you also referenced this earlier, you have to be good at budgeting. You have to set up a system that's, annual budgets, check in on a quarterly basis, doing reforecasts, and having the right people, right stakeholders in the room to discuss those budgets and forecasts. Not only at the enterprise level, but it's at the project level. And, Tanya, before, yes, B&P should have a budget. R&D should have a budget. The back office has its budget. And you got to stay disciplined. I mean, you get a huge win in the beginning of the year. That's your time to reforecast and go, oh yeah, now we need to get more money in our R&D
Yeah.
or B&P bucket. That's great. But if you don't have that discipline, you're going to end the year very disappointed.
Right.
So I think that's actually a really good, if someone's taking notes here and if our listeners are interested, the three of us are going to be speaking at the Visible Thread Optimize 26 on April the 14th. And I think this should be one of the topics that we talk about, which is like BMP budgets, right? It impacts all of us. It impacts whether you're going to conferences. It impacts, what you do from a marketing perspective. It impacts whether or not you can afford your bid and proposal staff and consultants and resources. And so there are some companies that are really good, but I think the things that you can't make these budgets in a vacuum. You can't have the money counters and the CFOs and the, accounting people make these budgets without understanding and collaborating with the front end BD capture people to understand, hey, listen, this is what's in my pipeline. These are the opportunities that we're going after. And this is what we think it's going to cost from a labor perspective, from a bid perspective, and come up with something that is going to be reasonable and executable and not some, like, I'm sorry, you know what I mean? Like, this is all I can spare. Well, there's always ways to find money somewhere, but it's a trade-off, right? Like
but your lender is going to want to know those things too. What are you going after? What do you expect to spend on it? And how much do you think it's going to cost to execute? So that's
it's a good exercise for everybody, right?
What Jeff and I look at all the time, I mean, if your stomach is smaller than your eyes when you're looking at a plate, right? You order a big old steak and you really just needed a side salad, So I think it's all relative when it comes down to, budgeting being so important and having everyone in the room to do that and everyone working off of their budget and what it's going to take and not just flying out everywhere that there is something going on and someone you could potentially meet. Especially right now, if you're trying to meet the government, they're not going anywhere. So you may as well stay home. I can't tell you how many events we've been to over the last year where those tables are empty.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation for another time too.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so looking ahead, what changes and trends in the GovCon landscape from your perspective, point of views? What do you think contractors should be paying closer attention to right now that you think is up ahead in terms of, BD capture proposal and the accounting and funding side?
So besides being in defense or drones or AI, you gotta understand what having a commercial product or service is all about. The new DOW strategy announced earlier this year talked a lot about moving towards commercial purchases. And so, there was a class deviation issued last year to encourage non-traditional contractors essentially automatically getting Part 12 contracts. And now they're essentially looking to change that to be more of a permanent authority, or at least a true DFARS rule instead of a class deviation. And so what does that mean to you as a company is, whether or not, a non-traditional contractor is defined right now is actually pretty simplistic. It's just, you're not fully cast covered. So that really just keeps some really large companies. I'm talking about 200 million and up are potentially cast cover. So there's a plenty of, I would say, traditional government contractors that still fall within that. Use that to your advantage. When you deliver a commercial service or good, there's a lot less compliance strings. And again, I'm talking here as a GovCon advisory person who makes money to help people, deal with compliance issues. There's a lot less compliance. I'm not saying there's none. CMMC doesn't go away. Nice try. But you got to be ready for that. So if you don't want to do it via that non-traditional method and you are traditional, figuring out where your product or service is how it's being used out in the commercial sector, you can sell it out there. Then you can easily say, look, I'm having everyone else pay $100 for this. You should pay $100 for it. I don't have to give you any cost for it. So yeah, understanding the commercial acquisitions right now is really critical.
Yeah. Ton, what are your 2 cents?
That's all right.
Nicely done.
Nicely played. Nicely played. Well, my 2 cents is, and I can't believe that I'm actually going to say this, but you need to start increasing your scrutiny on your price realism and your past performance. That's important. It's at the end of the day, it does come down to pricing and past performance a lot of times. There are more than enough companies who are technically capable. And if you can't articulate your technical solution right now, you need to sit out or bow out. And so, like that's a give me at this point. But I think the key players are going to be price realism and past performance. And I would probably also watch some contract consolidations. They're going away. I know that there are some that we've been tracking for years, if not months. And much to some of our customers' chagrin, they're being gobbled up, they're being canceled. And so that's where I always caution, hey, yes, do some pre-RFP work, do it responsibly, do it in a very, like tempered kind of way. Don't go all in on something because it could be canceled. And so, embracing the unpredictable and embracing the suck of all of it and how it's so unfair. Yeah, GovCon is unfair. So it is what it is. I said what I said and I stand by it. So,
Yeah. Favorites are played.
Yeah. I mean, it is a people versus people or people with people helping people, whatever you want to call it. Everyone's coming from their own subjective point of view.
Yeah.
So you don't want to burn any bridges and leave a lasting negative taste in someone's mouth. That's for sure. I think we've given a lot of great tips and insights here. I'd love to close it out with just one piece of advice that you may not have said yet, or that you have said, but you want to double down on it, that you can give to GovCon leaders that are trying to scale their organizations responsibly, of course. What would one be, Jeff? What would you say?
Yeah. So this really actually goes to the owners. Invest in yourself, meaning keep your profits in the company. Don't look to take as many distributions as you need or you think you need. I mean, banks not only want to see this, but your employees will really appreciate that you're taking those earnings and reinvesting in them, whether it's technology or training. Keep the money in the company, folks.
It's great advice. Ton?
So I'm always out for the soundbite. So my soundbite will be fight me. I think this year needs to be a big MMA match. You need to fight for your opportunity or fight to not go after something and just kind of be ruthless about it. And, if someone's feelings get hurt because you told them no, they can't go after it, too bad, right? It's like you have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that your organization and your company is as successful and profitable as possible. And being profitable is not a bad 4-letter word. Profit does a lot for organizations. It feeds back into R&D, it feeds back into staffing, it feeds back into a lot of different things. And so at the end of the day, you are still a for-profit organization. And so fight for it, stand up for it, and be brutal about it.
I love that. And I mean, for me, and looking at it with the constant struggle of being educated enough to shift, not pivot, shift as things change. They don't change very often when you're working in GovCon, right? The federal government moves about as fast as, I don't even know what moves as slow as things do with regard to change with them, especially when it comes into practice. But if you're not constantly educating yourself and then also taking ownership of the education of the entire organization itself, right? Just because you've learned it doesn't mean that everyone knows it too. And if you keep it to yourself, it isn't helping grow your business. And so, business owners need to be really adept at always learn. I mean, even before this call, Ton, you were saying about you read all the time. You need more time to read. Most business owners would say, I need more time to rest. She wants to read because the more she reads, the more she learns about the stuff that she can use to grow her business, right? And that's why we listen to her and we listen to Jeff and they're talking about these aspects of your business. And so you've got to be willing to be educated on a continuous basis because as things change, that portion of the market research is going to bring you to that next level. And then you won't be the only one in the room that doesn't know when something's being said. So I would take that advice as well, because if you sat on this call at all or listened to us at all and you heard something that didn't resonate, it's because you weren't reading enough. And if you're like me, who you just hit Google, you should go a step further after you figure out what the acronym is to go in and read information from trusted and reliable sources on that of how that can be applied to your business. And that's my soapbox for it. But I know that because we were having some technical difficulties in the beginning, I am going to go ahead and close us out so we can keep the time on this. But what I would encourage everyone to do, this will be running on loop on our Parabolis LinkedIn page throughout today. So since we're not going to have the live portion of the Q&A having come through right now, we encourage everyone to put your questions in the chat of this recording and direct them directly to Ton or to Jeff or to both so they can respond to you. They'll be checking back throughout the week. And we'll also, be running this through. We'll put it on a podcast post later in the week as well. So lots of opportunities for you to engage with Ton and Jeff to ask your questions directly. I encourage you to connect with them on LinkedIn if for some reason you are just learning about that today, which is more reason why you need to be reading more because they're all over the place. So if you've never heard of them, this is a great place to start. Connect with them on LinkedIn. But I super appreciate both of your time today. I think this was a great stepping stone for our next conversation on the 14th together. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys then. And thank you for your time and your expertise. You guys have been wonderful.
This has been fun, always.
Awesome. And thank you all for joining us. As always, we pride ourselves on sharing the most insightful and exciting people and information to help you better navigate your GovCon journey. If you like what you heard today, you can see all of our past podcasts, which are archived on our Parabolis YouTube channel. Stay tuned for all of our future guests in the coming months as we help you grow to great heights in the year ahead. I'm Teresa Moon, and this is Spilling the Tea on GovCon. Have a great day, my friends.